The whole hashtag blessed thing has undermined the meaning of blessed in many ways. But to be blessed is to be gifted something good beyond one's vision or circumstance. And Luke, you are a blessing to the youth work here at Parkside, at Elk Grove, and at Loomis Basin. We are really fortunate that you're with us. Jennifer, thank you for the song to open the worship, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. When I was a kid, I watched cartoons. And from what I can remember, most of those cartoons were in Technicolor. Those of you that watched the same cartoons, you remember there was a particular font just kind of arcing across the corner of the screen in Technicolor. But there were a lot of cartoons that were in black and white that I watched too. I'm that old. Most of those were reruns though. And so I did a little digging into the Technicolor process. And I was astounded at the number of layers, the numbers of people that went into the process of colorizing cartoons. Now, I don't understand it enough, so I'll just say it's complicated, and I'm glad they did it. Now, the Technicolor process has evolved over time. There's like 1, 2, 3, and there's more, but each iteration remains the fact that it takes a lot of people to convey a story in full, vibrant color. Some of the people that it takes are highly skilled. Some are assistants. Some take on tasks that require little specialized training, but all are necessary to the Technicolor process. And this is really important. Each person involved has talents and skills and hopes and dreams beyond those specific contributions. They are whole people. I'll say it again. Each person involved is much more than a contribution to any project or process. In the stories of The Wizard of Oz and in The Wiz, we clearly see that this journey is a team effort led by Dorothy, but none of them could have made it alone. They needed each other. And we watch them as they skip, dance, and fret along the yellow brick road. They and we learn that the process, or we learn that many of us chase what we already possess. And the deeper learning is that the primary obstacles to finding what we already possess are the repeated negative external messages that we internalize. Let me say that again. The primary obstacles to finding what we already possess are the repeated negative external messages that we internalize. But as they continue to skip, dance, and fret along the yellow brick road, we also learn that compassion, empathy, and encouragement have the potency to change our shared reality. Compassion, empathy, and encouragement have the power to overwhelm and overcome those internalized messages of negativity. But we can't do it alone. We need each other. These classic stories, The Wizard of Oz and The Wiz, the original book, are cultural reference points. We all, at least in North America, when we say the yellow brick road or don't be a scarecrow or what a tin man he is, we know what we're talking about. Full of symbolism. And every time we visit the land of Oz, at least in my case, I learned something new. The story at the wedding at Cana is also a story full of symbolism. And every time I go to that wedding, I learn something new. The story tells us that Mary, Jesus, and some of Jesus' friends were invited, and it's speculated that Mary knew the family and was respected by the household because she tells people what to do, and they listen. It's also understood that Nathanael, one of Jesus' disciples, was from Cana, and that he might have been the connection to get Jesus and the little crew of his friends an invitation. Again, the story is full of symbolism. It's layered in meaning. At the wedding, Mary is an early illustration of what is called by some feminist thinkers and commentators. Mary is an early illustration of the third shift. So the first two shifts are paid work outside the home. The second shift is household routine chores. Most households with partners share in doing paid work outside the home because we need two incomes in these days and times. And even if the household chores aren't shared equally, there's at least an awareness of what needs to be done. But the third shift is almost entirely, like 99%, falls on women. This third shift is difficult to describe, but if it's not tended to, things fall apart very quickly. Now, here's an attempt at an explanation by the 2017 Modern Family Index. It's a description of something that's been happening forever, but they gave it a shot. It says, the third shift, folks, are unofficial keepers of where the entire household needs to be and when they need to be there, and are perpetual guardians against anything falling through the cracks. You know, I grew up doing chores at my house, but never once did I have to know that the cleaning supplies needed to be stocked. I went to the closet and they were there like magic. And when it was my turn to mow the lawnmower was working. When I had a doctor's appointment, I didn't have to worry about how I was getting there or getting back. Somebody took care of those things. They didn't fall through the cracks in my experience, and I'm grateful for that because it's not that way for everybody. But Mary, like many women, is always on the third shift. There's a constant buzz going about in Mary's head about all the details that need to be in place for everyone in her circle to have what they need so they can do what they do. And at the wedding, Mary says, as she's on the third shift, they have no wine. Now, what business of it is Mary's? She's probably not the wedding coordinator. She's probably not the caterer. But Mary's on the third shift, and she happens to be in the space with Jesus and his friends when the wine runs out. And she says, they have no wine. And Jesus' response is, woman, what concern is that to you and me? Oh, I really hate Jesus' response. And I hate it for a couple of reasons. And I love Jesus, but I really hate this response. Because, one, it's so disrespectful. It's like, I can't imagine that even in a different historical context, in a different era, that this would be considered, that was a respectful way to talk to your mother. Two, and this is where it hits home. Two is Jesus' response exposes men's lack of awareness about the third shift. Exposes our utter lack of ability to show up because we're not even aware. And when those moments arrive, when a need is brought to a man's attention, and this isn't every man, but it's most of us, the response all too often is, so? It's not my problem. The sad thing is, we can all picture this happening. We all probably have a memory or two that just showed up And some of us are angry at the person, and some of us are feeling guilty. But there's Jesus, chilling with his homies at a wedding. They've been eating and drinking. And these weddings typically are multi-days long, so we don't know how long they've been there partying. But they're there at the point when the fruit of the vine runs out. And I can see as clear as day Mary's facial expression at Jesus' rude response. And it's like she sort of does a talk to the hand thing, turns away from him and says to the caterers, just do whatever he tells you. And I'm pretty sure my mother, Glory, learned that look from Mary herself. But at least Jesus, thank goodness, at least Jesus obeys his mother. You know, I think maybe in a way he was a little embarrassed. Maybe he caught himself being so rude and decides, okay. So Jesus says, fill the jars with water. And the jars are filled with water. And then the steward is taken a taste. Steward doesn't know where the wine comes from. And he yells out to the bridegroom, everyone serves the good wine first and then the inferior wine, after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now. Mary does the real work here. She is the perpetual guardian against anything falling through the cracks. But in our telling and retelling of the story, we give Jesus all the credit in isolation. Now, it's not to say that Jesus doesn't deserve some credit, but we are a people at Parkside Community Church. We are a people that claim to be a justice-seeking people, and an important part of being a justice-seeking people is to pay attention and to do all we can to see that the people who deserve credit get credit. Mary and Jesus and the catering crew who filled the jars with water, and somebody made those stone jars. When you pause and think things through, it took many people, some we know, some we don't know, some highly skilled, some are assistants, some take on tasks that require little specialized training, but all were necessary to make this sign happen. All are necessary to go from black and white to color, to turn water into wine. Now, some of you may have noticed that in reference to the water into wine, I said sign, when many refer to it as miracle. But in the Gospel of John, there are signs, not miracles. And the Gospel of John has 7 signs. Here they are. Changing water into wine at Cana, it's in John chapter 2. Healing the royal official's son in Capernaum, John chapter 4. Healing the paralytic at Bethesda, chapter 5. Feeding the 5,000 in chapter 6. Also in chapter 6, Jesus walking on water. Healing the blind man from the man blind from birth in chapter 9. And in chapter 11, raising Lazarus. You see, when we understand these events as signs rather than miracles, it draws us into further exploration, to search depths for meaning. Miracles can often be treated as a spectacle, a one-off performance that wows us. Signs, however, are part of an ever-evolving sacred journey. Signs are part of a life of learning. In rereading and rereading this story, a sign that we miss sometimes is that those stone jars held water for guests to commence with the ceremonial washing of hands. But very subtly and seamlessly in the story, thanks to Mary, Jesus, and those that helped, now these jars have been, quote, contaminated by wine for a wedding party. Now, I interpret this sign of turning water that was placed into those stone jars into wine is Jesus teaching us that when religious ceremonies of purity get in the way of authentic connection to one another and to God, that it's time to move past those methods of control. You see, every religion in every era has a string of clever, sinister, power-hungry jerks who leverage the power and beauty of religious ceremony and ritual into mechanisms for control and conformity. And those power-hungry jerks dole out severe punishments to those who dare subvert their perversion of the sacred. We all know what happens to Jesus. I believe Jesus gives us a sign by turning water in those stone jars to wine, a sign that calls us to break free, break free from controlling religious practice and move into liberative worship. And in this liberative space, we get to live into authentic connection. The kind of connection that calls us to be ever more inclusive at a party where our cups never run dry. That calls us into true relationship with God and each other. This is a sign that breaks the binary of black and white and opens our eyes to the infinite spectrum of color that has been all around us and in us the whole time. Important to remember that Jesus didn't do it alone. Right now, we at Parkside are in the process of co-creating a Technicolor Parkside. Nearly in the center of the sanctuary space is a pretty big scissor lift. And this scissor lift is here ready to install the second computer this afternoon. Craig, Ed, and Brian were here last week to examine the situation and determine what needed to be done. Becky and Margaret have been diligent at work to preserve valuable artifacts that our moving around has reminded us of, but artifacts and documents that will help preserve the history and legacy of Parkside, and to remember many people who helped create and sustain this church. Rosie has been recruiting ushers for our in-person return next Sunday. Singers have been arriving early Sunday mornings to practice music together. Forrest and Cindy are preparing the welcome table to greet you. Some who will be physically at Parkside for the very first time. Brian is preparing to be our virtual host. Janet and Jeff have been working tirelessly over many hours to get prepared for new ways of being together in person and online. The janitorial crew, the landscapers, all have been hard at work. Next week, we will honor those who have served in elected leadership roles and those who will be newly elected to lead. Every one of us, those that I've mentioned and those that I've failed to mention, have contributed to keeping life going these past 15 months. And every single one of us will be needed to navigate the newness of life as we contemplate what a community immunity life can be. None of us can do it alone. Let's continue to look for signs that will guide us into deeper and truer relationship with God and with each other. As we skip, dance, and fret along Southland Park Drive, may we learn that compassion, empathy, and encouragement have the potency to change our shared reality, to make the world a better place for you and me and the entire human race. Amen.